So let's get started. I am thrilled to introduce today's presenter, Sarah Eva Monroe. She is the Senior Creative Director here at mStoner. Sarah Eva has more than 10 years of digital, creative, and strategy experience, and in her work for Obama for America, Sarah Eva drove digital strategy in online advertising, as well as web and email communication optimization. Sarah Eva's approach to solving client challenges is to create beautiful work that achieves functional goals following a process that flexes the creative work in response to analytics and user data. And as a side note, Sarah Eva, that's one of the most beautiful sentences I've ever had the privilege to say. Sarah Eva's current clients include Tufts University, Harvard Graduate School of Education, and Brown. During today's session, like I said, you can tweet Sarah Eva at Sarah Eva, me at Mallory Wood, and don't forget to use the hashtag mStonerNow. Sarah Eva, I'm going to turn my webcam off and turn this one over to you. Thanks. Let's get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Mallory. All right, so hopefully you all can hear me as well. We've got just about 45 minutes together, and I guess a little bit less now. We're going to reserve some time at the end for questions. So my part of this should be about 25 to 30 minutes. So let's get started. So first of all, I wanted to start with what I hope you'll take away from this presentation. First of all, the state of direct mail is that people like mail. It's still a really valid format, for all of the talk about digital being a primary way that many people are spending their marketing dollars. Mail is still a big part, should be a big part of your strategy. The second takeaway that I'd like to leave you all with is the idea that the envelope is a messaging vehicle. So of course, the outside of your package actually is probably a better way to say that. So we're going to look at a number of different examples of actual pieces that arrive in your mailbox, what they look like, what they feel like, how they use kind of a visual strategy to get your attention while they're actually in the mailbox vying for attention. So let's jump right in. So people do like mail. So in terms of the state of the industry, this research is actually from a study that was done very recently. And so 70% of Americans say that mail is more personal than the internet. So I don't think this is something that we would all disagree with. And in fact, this tracks up to something that we're going to look at in a little bit later, which is called the mail moment. And I think you guys all know what that is. That's the idea that there's a ritual that you go through at the end of the day where you actually get the mail. It's a little different from the ritual we have with our email, or especially from maybe messages that exist for us on a portal or an intranet where we have to go fetch those messages. So I would agree that mail and actually picking up the mail in your mailbox is more personal than something you see on your screen. So to that end, 55% of those surveyed look forward to discovering the mail they receive. And that means not only actually taking the mail out of the mailbox, but actually looking through it, understanding which things are personal, which things are interesting to them, and which things they'd like to spend more time with. And so further supporting this, 56% of people say receiving mail is actually a real pleasure. So this is a very rosy-cheeked view of mail, I'm sure you guys are all saying right now. We're going to go into a little bit more about the other side of this, but I do think that fundamentally there is a lot of pleasure that goes into getting a handwritten card from a friend or from a family member, or getting a magazine that you're really looking forward to reading. And so all of those emotions are wrapped up into the walk out to the mailbox. And to me, this is a really interesting stat, that 72% of consumers bring in their mail as soon as possible on the day it's delivered. I think it is the rare person who, if you live in an apartment building, you don't stop off at the mailbox on your way up to your apartment to get your mail. You don't say, oh, I'll come down and get that later. It generally is something that you do as soon as you have some proximity to that mailbox. So again, a lot of emotions wrapped up in this ritual. And now going more towards the idea of who actually in the house is looking at the mail. So it's not generally someone who isn't making purchasing decisions. It is someone who functions as the head of household. And so in this 90% of cases, I think if we can all reflect on our own mail experience, if a 10-year-old went through the mail in our family and actually threw out things based on their own judgment, the parent probably wouldn't be very happy with that. And so just from that kind of gut check, you do understand that the head of the household really is the one making decisions about mail and making decisions about which things are important and which things aren't. So again, this is a little bit of kind of marketing mail from the USPS.com, but they define the mail moment. And so this is the idea of that ritual we've been talking about. when consumers devote a specific time of their day to bringing in the mail and discovering it. And so when you do put your marketing messages into this moment, first of all, you want to be respectful, which is why, when we all get those kind of starbursts and kind of very crazy mailers, they get our attention, but in a way that isn't very positive. And so what we're going to talk about today are ways to use this emotional moment and leverage it for our own marketing purposes, but not to such an extent that we're turning people off. All right, so as I mentioned, in terms of student reactions, the sheer volume of college mail does create different emotions that, it's a little bit of looking forward to things, but it's also a little bit of a deluge, as I know that you all are familiar with. So, these are the piles that our students are contending with. And I think that these reactions exist on a spectrum. So I think you guys probably have all thought about this, but in this framework, I think it's kind of interesting to think about maybe starting in the upper left-hand corner. So someone who thinks it's very novel to get mail, starting on the left, they may also be confused. So they get a letter from Princeton and they think, am I being recruited by the Ivy League? And you actually go and look at forums, look at Tumblr, and there is a fair amount of confusion from students about exactly how schools got their name. So if you look at the lower left of the quadrant, you see a student who kind of feels that it's an ordinary experience to get lots of mail, but they're confused. Why am I getting this mail? How did these schools get my name? And of course, there are lots of blog posts out there dedicated to explaining exactly how that happens and the fact that testing companies sell student names and all of that. But many students don't bring that knowledge to that process when they are a sophomore or junior in high school. And so it can be confusing. And I think that the main thing to think about here is that you want to make sure that your messaging is, first of all, introducing your school and yourself in a way that helps the student have some context for why you are actually reaching out to them. Because in the case of kind of the Ivy League confusion, I think getting a postcard from Dartmouth, it would take a certain kind of student to misunderstand that as, Dartmouth really, really wants me to go there. But on the other end of that, if it is a student who's maybe a good fit for Dartmouth and they start to get this mail, it may be that introducing yourself and kind of giving some more context to why you're actually sending this particular student this mail would really go a long way towards helping your message being noticed. So a concrete example of that is saying, we noticed you're one of the top schools in your class. And of course, that can be done with targeting in terms of GPA, in terms of test scores, all of those types of things. But that gives some context to these students who are confused and who maybe are wondering how in the world they got onto all these lists. And so just by doing something like that, you may be able to stand out and pretty much answer their question, and so give them a higher level of satisfaction with your communication. So moving on to the right-hand side and the top right quadrant. So there are students out there who react in a way where they feel that it's novel, and you do see lots of students saying, I love seeing my name in print. It's so fun to get mail. Because up till this point, you really don't get a lot of mail as a teenager, a young person. Your parents may have signed you up for catalogs or things like that, or inadvertently start receiving catalogs. But in many cases, you are, again, thinking back to the head of household, you are not the main person who actually gets mail. So it can be very novel. And again, that's one of the reasons that it does still work. So this student feels that it's novel and they're informed. They're not at all put off by the idea that their name was sold. And so they're thinking, I love seeing my name in print and this is so beautiful. So in some ways, this is kind of the ideal student that you can think about receiving your pieces. The idea that they are actually delighted to get it and anxious to go through and look at it because it's still a novel experience for them. So moving on down to the bottom right quadrant. Now this is the student who is most jaded, and I think this is a student that that maybe only certain types of schools would probably want to target communications to. But the idea of, I can't believe the testing companies sell student names, I'm throwing all of this stuff away. So these students are fairly hard to reach, but these are the ones who may be drawn in by something that is extremely targeted. And by targeted, I don't mean something that necessarily only has their name or some kind of personalization like that, but something that actually speaks to who they are, where they are in the search process, and what their interests are. And so again, this is a student that's kind of hard to reach because they do have a certain level of skepticism about the entire kind of direct mail process, but it's worth thinking about all of these reactions from all of these different types of students. As you're kind of thinking about, what are our headlines? What do we want to say to these students? How do we want to introduce ourselves for the first time? So this is kind of a fun example of an actual student reaction. So if you see the caption along the bottom, and this is actually from Tumblr, so it says, "Some college mail can be useful. Thanks for the pretty quotes from my inspiration board, MIT." And these are beautiful. I was so glad to see these. These are really fun. I think the nice thing about these is that they offer some utility. And so not only are they marketing materials, but they're actually pieces that, as this person says, she's going to put up on her inspiration board. So it has some utility beyond just being a marketing message. And that's always a big, big, big positive. However, if you look down at the tags, kind of the ironic hashtag she's used, it says, "Still not applying to your school, though. I'm a social sciences major." So kind of funny, and you know, not something that's terrible at all, but it is a little funny that in this case, the institution who sent this could understand from this that maybe a social sciences major wouldn't be as interested in going there, and so maybe, you know, this isn't someone who needs to get a big package. So this kind of goes back to targeting. So keeping an eye out for stuff like this on Tumblr, especially. That's one place that students do a lot of talking about college mail. But also other social media channels, like Instagram is another big one where you see a lot of reactions for college mail. Speaking of Instagram, so in this case, tons and tons and tons of mail here, and I'm sorry, I apologize in advance if anyone sees their brand name in here, but these are the examples that are out there. These are the real mail that students are getting. And so in this case, this student's saying, you know, too much every day. And of course, this doesn't mean we should stop sending mail. It just means that we should be sensitive and respectful of the fact that our students are having an experience where they're getting a really, really, really high volume of this type of stuff, which just kind of increases the responsibility that we have to do a great job at it, so that we are hopefully providing a moment of delight in their day and not just another thing for them to open or throw away or recycle, hopefully. So moving on, we are going to take a look at the outside of your package. So the idea that your envelope or the outside is a messaging vehicle for exactly the reasons I was just saying. Students can be skeptical. They want to understand how things can be useful to them, but they don't want to waste their time because they do have a lot of volume coming at them. So the way we like to talk about this here is through entry points. So here I've listed 4 different entry points that we're going to take a look at some examples. So scale and color, personalization, messaging, and then tactile qualities. So first of all, just a kind of an overall view of what entry points are. So these are places where visitors can, their eye is drawn, and it's the first place you want them to look. So it's kind of, you can think about it as a focal point, but a focal point in some cases means only one area, whereas there can be multiple entry points for a piece. So instead of presenting someone with a wall of text that's very, very dense, there's no way for them to really jump into that in a way that feels friendly and makes them feel like they understand what they're jumping into. But providing an entry point, perhaps in the case of some kind of a, you know, a large capital letter opening a paragraph, or a photo with a caption, or anything like that, will give someone a way to enter into the design and enter into that messaging in a way that feels comfortable to them. So a couple examples. First of all, I'm going to show you, this is going to be a pile of mail, and I want you guys to get a sense of what you see in just this very, very short glimpse. Okay. So looking at this, so of course, if we were in the room together, I would have you guys shout out what you saw. But my guess is that you saw this last chance envelope, and that was maybe one of the only things that you were able to understand from that really quick glimpse. So the reason here is that, first of all, it's a color that really stands out. You know, there is an orange, there's a bright red here, there's a bright green, but this yellow does a really, really nice job in this particular image of popping. There's also a sense of scale. So in this case, it's not that the envelope itself is big, but it's that the typography is very big. And so very, very readable, and of course, partnered with a very, really bright pop of color, you have kind of this unique combination of scale and color that makes it memorable, makes it jump out at you, and makes it very easy for your brain to understand, here's what this envelope is saying to me. So a few examples from higher ed. So this is one of our clients, the University of Missouri, and they play with both scale and color with their existing suite of materials. So this piece is 14 by 9 inches. So this is a very large piece. There's also a sense of heft to it. It's pretty thick. It's maybe about ½ an inch thick. And as you guys notice, it's also using yellow, which really, really pops in the mailbox. And we were able to do some focus groups with students about this exact piece. And it was so fascinating to hear from them the fact that all of them said, oh, it was big, it was yellow. And it really was very, very consistent that they said, you know, I opened it because it was big, I opened it because it was yellow, it stuck out. So I don't want to leave you with the message that big and yellow is the way to go, but this is one thing that's worked. And of course, for a school like Mizzou, that you know, this gold color really is a huge brand color for them, and it's a very, very big school, that was the right message for them. But in this case, I want to show you a different kind of school. So this is a piece that we did for William and Mary, and this is the ampersand box. So this is small. This is about 6 by 4, and so it's tiny in terms of scale. It also has a bit of heft to it, so it is kind of thicker. This is actually filled with postcards. But as you notice also from the color here, this one is not quite monochromatic, but it's very, very subtle. So when you look at these two together, so we have kind of the craft paper of the William and Mary ampersand box, and then you have the gold and black of the Mizzou piece. So the size and the scale, the scale and the color of these two things are kind of at opposite ends of the spectrum, but they both work because they're not number 10 envelopes that are white. They do stick out because of their difference from other things in the mailbox. So moving on to personalization, I have no doubt that many of you have calendars on your office walls that have your name spelled out in clouds or in the sand or something like that. This has become something that, that those of us who deal with printers a lot see every single day. So we're going to talk a little bit about personalization and how to do it in a smart way that, that isn't kind of gimmicky or cheesy. And I think this is a really nice, clearly kind of a back of the napkin Venn diagram. So students do want it to be all about them. They want things that are tailored. They want things that are personalized, but they don't want things that are cheesy, mail merge, auto-generated. And so right in between there is kind of the sweet spot of what we want to hit. So the way that I want to talk about personalization is with variable data printing. So I think you guys are, again, probably very familiar with this, but instead of producing 10,000 copies of a single document, you're actually producing 10,000 unique documents with customized messages for each customer. And this is driven by a database. So in this case, this is an example from a car dealership. But really, really interesting usage of this because they have all of these different car models, so Eurovans, GTIs, Jettas, all of that. And what they do is they actually swap in the photo of the car so that when you get it, it's actually your car. And so it's the car that you've purchased from this place, and you have a recognition of both the color as well as the model. So it really hits you in kind of a visceral visual place that, that they are talking directly to you about the car that they know you have. So there's kind of a nice elegance to this. It doesn't come across as kind of the cheesy thing. An example of that is here, insert name here, with the child running on the beach. So again, we've all seen this. We don't want to necessarily be doing this. Students have a very finely tuned bowl meter, and so they see this and they know that other people got the same one. But what we do want to be doing is more of this. And this is an example from Columbia College Chicago. So I want to go through a couple different areas of the customization that's happening here. And this is actually an excerpt, so the piece is cut off a bit so I can show a few more things. But what you're seeing in the bottom right-hand corner is, first of all, the student's name, and then actually their financial award amount right here. So it's a very specific amount, and it is only for that student. Now, that's the front of the piece. If you look at the back, there is something to brag about and to find out more about us. So there's something to brag about. These actually awards and touts are actually specific to the major that Maxwell is interested in studying. So in this case, there's music, there's game design, there's some journalism stuff, and there's some fashion things. But when this would be a real piece that went out, these would actually all be in kind of a similar industry in order to provide the most compelling touts to Maxwell. And then looking inside, this is actually, I think, one of the best usages of variable data printing that I've seen. So on the right-hand side, you are seeing really nicely done alumni success stories. And these are, again, specific to the major of the student Maxwell. And then on the left, you're seeing kind of a more traditional financial aid award. But because this is all in kind of a nice folded brochure, very glossy, very, very cohesively designed, what you're seeing is this specific information for Maxwell that's very, very relevant to him, that kind of gives him a sense that the rest of this information is also relevant to him. So the whole thing feels very personal and feels like it's going right to him because it's packaged in a way that first of all feels very professional, feels very glossy, but presents this information that he really does want to know. And so I think as far as personalization, this is a really, really great way to do it that is not cheesy at all. All right, so another example here. This is Cheshire Academy, and this one is meant for a slightly younger audience, and so there's kind of a little bit more fun being had here. And so you're noticing the ticket area. So someone who may want to be studying theater in this case, or maybe set building, you know, they put their name right here in the ticket. So you're kind of connecting again visually. And then I like this, his stuff tells the story right above that. So they're saying Adam G, you know, and then they put together this collage that, again, is all driven by data, but it's a collage that tells a story of maybe the type of student that he might be. If he's very interested in soccer, he's, you know, very interested in sports in general, and maybe from the looks of it, there's some books in there, things like that. So again, this is a kind of a younger age, so there's not as much nichiness that you would find in college. But anyway, these things are smart. They're not. It's not clear that it's so easy to do this with a mail merge. It does take a lot more thought. It takes a little bit more pre-planning to get these collages ready to be assembled. But working with the right printer and with the right partner, you'll be able to do this in a smart way, and then, you know, trigger all of these and have these students get these amazing pieces that feel like they're speaking right to them. So this is an example from the University of Chicago, and it's a little hard to see exactly here, but this is a student whose name is Tangina, and she Instagrammed that that they had actually taken her name and put it on here, and so she's on the quadrant that feels that it's novel. So she's saying, "Say my name, wear it out." You know, so she's like, "Oh, it was my name. You know, it feels good. It's a good thing." However, it's a little funny. She got some responses from other folks who said, "I got the same one. You're not special." So, you know, again, there's some humor here, and you have to know that with social media, when you do something that's personalized, especially with a name, there will be other students who kind of chime in and say, "Hey, I got that one too," and that's not a terribly bad thing. You know, this is still on social media. It's still out there. There's extra kind of word of mouth happening with this piece, and that's always a really positive thing. All right. So on the other side of this, there's a postcard that says, "We've been thinking about you, Daniel." And in this case, Daniel says, "Please don't," which again is kind of more in the skeptical quadrant of a student who's saying, you know, this is a little too obvious for me. And that being said, it's not a bad strategy. It's just when a student is getting a lot of these, and again, thinking about our audience, when they're getting so many dozens of these and they all have their name or they all have kind of more of an obvious mail merge, it can be a little bit much from a student perspective. All right, so moving into messaging, you want to be thinking in terms of what is your offer. So direct marketing, and specifically direct mail, is about presenting a value proposition and a call to action right away. So I think this is a great example from SIU. So this is actually their envelope. And first of all, in terms of scale, in terms of typographic scale, really, really bold. What I really like about this message is that they are saying, "We've determined that your achievements make you a great candidate for a generous academic scholarship at SIU." So that's a really, really, really nice piece of context. So that's, the student would never say, you know, "I don't know how they got my name." They would understand that somehow, kind of in the magical college and high school connections that happen, that somehow SIU has looked at their academic credentials and understood that they're a really good candidate. And I think that's a really, really great way to introduce yourself to a student. Now the back of this is a little bit more restrained, but I think there's still some really nice things here. So this tagline of "It all begins here," and then again the idea of a scholarship opportunity inside. So it may feel that it's kind of repetitive to do it on both the front and the back, but you do have to think, you know, a student gets this, within 2 seconds they're deciding whether to throw it away. And if it happens to be turned upside down when they get it, you still want them to get that really, really important message that you would like to offer them a scholarship, because that's one of the most compelling messages that colleges have, which is, "We'd like to give you money for you to come here." And so when you do have that and you have that message to deliver, you want to make sure that envelope gets opened. Right. That being said, you know, if you are working under a tight budget, you may want to do a test. So, you know, you select a subset of your list and you send them information in a plain envelope and then in more of a branded envelope. So before you actually go whole hog and send it to your whole list, doing a test is a really great way to understand if there are budget savings to be made just by adjusting your outside envelope. we always advocate for testing here at mStoner. All right, so another great example here from Vanderbilt. First of all, it's a little hard to see, but they're actually using a really nice kind of metallic ink to develop this message. So this moment actually is something that will pop in the sunlight. It kind of has a bit of a glitter to it. And then what you're noticing on the bottom are, you guys are probably familiar with this, but these are wafer seals. What this means is that this has been mailed in a way that folks can see this message. And so this wasn't in an envelope. So by wafer sealing things, you're actually getting the outside of your piece in the mail, in the mailbox, so that someone doesn't actually even need to open an envelope in order to see it. Okay, so on the same kind of theme, you may think that postcards are a great way to go in order to get your message out there without using an envelope. And I think that that can be a good thing. However, all of these postcards are exactly the same size. So when you bring in your mail, you kind of put it into a stack. So it could be that if your postcard is delivered on the same day as a number of other postcards from other schools, it may be that that similarity in size and format, they all just get kind of folded together and then tossed away. So you do want to be careful, and you may want to experiment with non-standard sizes, especially with postcards. So the last thing we're going to look at here is tactile qualities. So you guys can kind of absorb this. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but what I like about this is that there's actually research that's been done that shows that when we have tactile qualities in an envelope or in a piece of an object that we're holding, our brains create a landscape. And so we connect that message to the idea of this feels rough, this feels smooth, this feels slippery. All of those things contribute to your message and actually make a big difference in how it's perceived. So a couple examples. Now this is a nice example of kind of an embossing that actually happens in the cardboard, so that there's actually kind of a textured feeling as you actually touch the envelope. This can be the right fit for a certain kind of brand that maybe has some visual elements that would benefit from the introduction of kind of some tactile feeling. And then again, kind of back to the Vanderbilt example, this is the inside of that piece, and you can see that there's a shimmer on the left-hand side. There's kind of a gold metallicness there that feels a little bit differently than the other parts of the printing piece. So again, something that really allows someone to connect with the feel of the paper. Now, one of the most, I guess I could say, kind of aggressive or out there tactile qualities is something called an involvement device. So this is something that someone actually needs to take an action in order to see the whole message. So this is a really good example. Having a folder where you actually need to pull out a piece of paper kind of functions as almost a pull tab. So you're revealing something, and by doing that, you're taking action and therefore kind of investing a little bit more of your own moment into that. So your physical action is causing some of the message to be revealed. And also, one of the things that the tactile qualities that's so important about those is you're actually involving other senses other than just the eyes. So in this case, you are involving someone's sense of touch and someone's hearing as they pull this tab out. Maybe it makes kind of a nice little satisfying noise. So the more emotions, the more senses that you engage, the better a sense of emotion you will evoke. So this is another example. So pull here to reveal your bonus savings. So this is kind of the equivalent, I think, the print equivalent of a hover state. So in this case, someone doesn't actually have to open the entire envelope, but they can pull this one little tab and understand exactly what is meant by bonus savings and be drawn into the message just a little bit more. And I think this is an interesting example. I'm sorry about the low quality of this one. But in this case, it's a name tag. So, hello, my name is. But they're actually putting their messaging right onto that sticker. And so the idea of taking off a sticker, first of all, has some novelty to it, but also is just another way to get that sticker stuck somewhere so that your brand is out there a little bit more. So an involvement device can be as simple as a perforation. So in this case, from Elmhurst College, on the right-hand side, will my courses transfer is also kind of a bookmark sized piece, and it actually tears off, and it folds out from the opening cover of this piece. And so even the fact that you have to flap and then tear this perforation is something that involves someone and brings them into the piece a little bit more than just flipping through. All right, so the last thing I want to show is something that, that we haven't used ever, but I think is maybe going to have its moment soon, and this is actually video. So I would say this would be something that should be reserved for only the most highly qualified of your prospects, so students that you really, really want to attend. And I'm going to, there we go. So I'm not sure if you guys get the audio. It doesn't really matter. It's actually just music. But this is an example from the Mayo Clinic. And I'm sorry I don't have any pricing on this, but if you guys are super interested in this for any of your purposes, I'm sure that the vendor would be more than happy to give you some pricing. But what happens here is that the video actually plays in this direct mail piece. And as I mentioned, this is likely not cheap, but with the understanding that we all have that video is no doubt a huge part of your digital strategy, something you use on your website all the time, it may be that sending a video through the mail might be the most effective and efficient way for you to get your message out to your students. So that's been kind of a quick overview, and I plan to follow up with some blog posts talking a little bit more about direct mail, so watch out for those. But now I'll throw it over to Mallory.
All righty, let me pop my webcam back on. So Eva, that was a lot of information packed into 30 minutes. Thank you so much. And folks, don't forget to send in your questions. I do have a couple that I will be getting to in just a moment. But before I do that, please don't forget to fill out the very short survey once you log out of the webinar. Your feedback is valuable, and it will help us determine future webinar topics, particularly around print-focused webinars. So please don't forget to fill that out. And just a quick plug for our next webinar, which is increasing traffic to your degree, major, and certificate pages. That'll be presented by our strategist, Deb Bapinski. Data from Ruffalo, Noel Levitz, and EduVentures shows us that degree listings and pages representing individual degrees, majors, minors, and certificates are critically important to marketing content on college and university websites. But how do you actually get people to those pages? So using different techniques and examples, Doug's webinar will focus on improving traffic to degree pages, and I'm going to chat out a link to that in just a moment and also send that through Twitter. So let's get to your question. Sarah Eva, does the level of customization used in variable data printing like your Columbia College Chicago example cost a lot of money?
No, it actually doesn't. I mean, there is an initial setup time in terms of spending the time to get your Excel file all correct and making sure that you want the right elements to go into the right places, but there's actually no additional cost in the printing process itself because the software exists on press these days with digital printing that running 10,000 copies of slightly different things is no additional cost than running 10,000 of the same piece. So it can be really effective.
I love Eric's tweet. He's been kind of, taking notes and sharing some of them. And you'll like to see that, Sarah, I'm sure. But he just shared a photo that says "video mail" with 2 exclamation marks. What? Question mark. I love it. I couldn't believe that example. I thought that was really cool. Do you think that colleges and universities will jump on the video mail bandwagon?
Well, like I said, I do think it's really only for highly qualified prospects. So I actually think it could be a really, really interesting acceptance piece. And I didn't get a chance to get into acceptance pieces here, but I have some great examples of ways to bring that into kind of 3D and into things that are a little bit more than the big envelope versus a small envelope. So I think there's some real creativity there. And especially, as folks are very worried about yield and getting students to actually commit, I think that's a really great usage for potentially the video. So hopefully we'll see that soon.
That'd be really interesting. I would, if anyone on this webinar does a video mail piece, please send us one. We would love to see it. All right, so next question. How do you suggest dealing with custom pieces when you only have the formal name, like James Smith, when in reality James goes by Jimmy? Would that, that would probably negate the personal aspect?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And actually, there was one example I saw where a student was kind of like, ugh, they can't even get my name right, and there was a typo in the student's name. But I would wager that the student filled out the form and maybe typoed their own name, and so we know that that's how these data mistakes happen, is they're all kind of self-inputted by the student. So so I would say if you're worried about that, you'll want to have a default that you use for folks who you feel like you don't have a good sense of what their actual name is or something that would be personal for them. So because I do think that it's much more jarring to get something that's incorrect rather than something that's not personalized.
All right, our next question, any thoughts on QR or barcodes for scanning, or is that passe?
Well, that's such a really interesting thing. I think that in many, many cases, there's even a website out there, I think it's a Tumblr, that, gives you a flow chart of whether or not you should use a QR code, and all answers lead to no. And so my instinct is that QR codes, for whatever reason, have not been adopted at the rate that, that they should have been, because I do think they would be useful. I think it's a very useful idea to bridge print and digital. I don't think people have the apps to do it. So I have been in focus groups where students are like, oh, they had a QR code, I love that. And then other students were like, I don't know what that is. And then the other students were kind of like, oh, you know what, I should get that app, that sounds cool. So I think there's, it's still burgeoning, but one reason that I don't think it's going away is that Google Cardboard, which you guys may be familiar with, which is kind of a virtual reality, a low-cost virtual reality headset that Google sells, maybe about $20, and you can actually have kind of an Oculus Rift kind of experience. So in order to download apps, they actually use QR codes within that piece, or in order to build the little piece, you actually do a QR code to get the instructions, and that's really the only way to get that. So to me, when large companies like Google are still using technologies like that, it tells me that that there's still potential there, but I don't think there's a high adoption rate. So it's a tough one to answer. I really do think that at some point, something like QR codes will come forth and be the thing, and that may actually be near field communication, where your phone can actually sit on top of something and get information from that. It doesn't require a special app. So, as soon as that is fully propagated into all Apple products, then everything, the adoption rates go way up. So I think in the next couple of years, there will be something, there will be something that connects print and digital. I don't think QR codes as they currently exist is that thing.
Well, you heard it
Long
here
answer.
first, people.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think Stratton's short answer would be that QR codes kill kittens, but which is a great book, and everybody should get that book. But I remember, and this is, granted, this was 5 years ago, but when I was working for St. Michael's College, we put a QR code on one of our college fair pieces that was focused around like the great skiing and snowboarding you can do in Vermont, and it sent you to a really great video, and it was all done correctly. But, and granted, it was 5 years ago, and QR code adoption was far less than as it is now. But I mean, I think that, the traffic to that video is very minimal from the QR code. So, it's like, is it worth it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's what we found.
All right. Yeah. All right. So, what are your thoughts on importance and relevance of traditional view books in a direct mail strategy?
So I continue to think that they are important. I think that on our website, we call it the kitchen table effect. So they have heft and they have depth that is hard to throw away, hard to recycle, because it really is a deep, complex piece. And in all the focus groups we lead, we hear from students that they enjoyed looking through it. It was something they threw in their backpack, something they would look through when they're waiting, for sports practice or things like that. So something they really spend a lot of time looking at over a long period of time. What I would say is that don't send your viewbook to everybody. Students who are not really in your persuadable target are going to pitch it, and it will probably be an expensive waste of money at that point. But for students who you're trying to persuade, I think it can be a really important tool and something that is much easier for them to understand aspects, and especially campus and kind of spirit aspects of your school, rather than the web, which is much more about, kind of presenting information and doing transactions and things like that. And not that the website isn't important and you can't do a beautiful slideshow and gallery and all that to show your campus beauty, but there's something about opening that centerfold of a view book and seeing, whether it's a full stadium, like an aerial stadium shot, or a really, really huge panoramic photo of your academic quad. There's just something that's really emotionally evocative about that. And so I think for even that reason alone, I think that viewbooks are not at all passe.
Awesome. Thank you. Second to last question that I have now, so this is last call if you have questions to get them in. One of our attendees notes that they don't do much direct mail at their school, but the larger university does more. And that's primarily because mailing is obviously more costly than digital and other channels. So how can this attendee convince their recruitment office and others that direct mail is still valuable? However, it's difficult to quantify the success and results, in comparison to some of those less expensive channels.
Yeah, no, I do think that that's a really important question, and it can be hard to quantify. You can use things like personalized URLs and things like that in order to understand whether students are actually getting that piece of content and then going to the web to find out more or kind of doing other things. But I guess what I would say is start small. So start with a test where you're providing an offer, you're providing some kind of something that actually requires the student to take an action. Whether it's 20% off at the bookstore or something like that, just something where you can actually understand whether or not they acted on it, and start to watch that. Because I do think that the larger kind of brand building pieces, it's very hard to understand how that fits into the larger persuasion cycle. And because you're not in your students' living rooms or at their kitchen tables, understanding how many times they look at that piece. The other thing I would say is try to set up some focus groups right after students start or even before they start during orientation, and have those recruitment folks involved in that and ask these questions directly. Say, did you receive this piece? And what did you think of it? And, all of these questions that kind of get at this sense of what do we not know about how these pieces are being used? And if you're not using them right now, you can also get some from your peers or competitors to kind of understand how they played into the decision cycle. And the other thing I would say is that maybe, it isn't for everyone. You don't need to do a heavy direct mail cycle in order to be successful and get students to come to your school. But if there are certain things that you're really trying to change or different types of students you're trying to get, maybe more high ability students from a certain zip code, using some direct mail strategies might be a great way to kind of get a start into that market. I hope that answers the question.
Do you think most institutions are printing on or off campus?
Well, that's a really good question. We work with a lot of clients who have a trusted printer that's near them geographically, but not necessarily on campus. So the cases where we do have folks who are printing on campus, it's usually larger state schools, not as much the small liberal arts schools. So I will say it can be tricky to limit yourself to a certain print vendor right at the beginning of a process, because it kind of sometimes does lock down some of the options you have. They may have certain size limitations. They may not be able to do certain kinds of embossing or certain types of, most places can do lots of inks, but some of the more tactile things I was talking about, some of those are very specialized vendors. And so if you really are looking to kind of do something special, it may be worth it to look at outside vendors off campus and understand the capabilities that exist there.
So building that into the strategy up front before actually doing all the design is probably a smart idea. Cool.
Yep.
And last question, do you have any thoughts on balancing broader marketing messages with those personal appeals that you talked about?
Yes, so I think the way to do it, first of all, is when you're starting to introduce yourself to a student, and when you know that in the search, the place they are in the search cycle is maybe as a junior, and you're maybe thinking about your initial touch piece, that's really meant to be an introduction. So that can be broader. That can be about your brand, contextualizing who you are, maybe what you're known for as compared to your peers, things that differentiate you. And then as the student gets further and further along in the cycle, first of all, if the student hasn't applied to you and it's way late in the cycle, this is not the time to be sending them brand pieces, because at that point, they're probably, dancing with someone else. It's kind of that, when you're applying for a job, sometimes no news means that someone else is getting news, because there's conversations happening. And so if you have and I would make sure that your data is up to date enough so that you know that if a student hasn't responded to you for 6 months of the cycle, and now you're kind of approaching the summer before you'd like them to enroll based on their grad year, you probably don't even need to be wasting money on them anymore with direct mail. That being said, students who are very, very engaged, who have applied, all of that, who you're really trying to kind of make sure that they're really well poised to yield over the summer and in the spring, then those are students that you want to make sure that you're sending very targeted messaging, that you're perhaps even reaching out to them with letters from specific faculty members welcoming them, or things like this, things that are much more specific and much more targeted, because that student has volunteered more information about themselves, and most importantly, they've volunteered a really strong sense of interest in you, and so you should be paying more attention to them as well.
So I'm hearing that if you're going to spend money on personalization and you don't have a ton of money to spend, focus it on the yield portion of the cycle.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway. Yep.
Okay, cool. Well, that is it for the questions. Sarah Eva, this was a really informative, excellent session. Thank you so much for presenting today's webinar. And folks, don't forget, you've got that short exit survey, and I hope that we do see you later in the month for our program pages webinar. So thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your week. Happy Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.